Well, here we are, days now after the U.S. Assassinated Iranian General Qassem Soleimani, and we are still awaiting some sort of military response from the Iranians. They've been promising that there will be some form of retaliation. They're going, oh, just you wait, oh, it's going to be good. And here we are all with bated breath. And President Trump came out and decided to front-run some of those expectations, and is now threatening his own retaliation to their retaliation, which is not the worst idea in the world. I think that considering how long it's taken Iran to come up with what the retaliation is, they're clearly nervous, and they don't want to do anything too extreme that could escalate the situation further, because obviously, as I've said so many times, war is definitely not in their interest. They don't want to fight the U.S. because that's a fight that they can't win. But at the same time, they don't want to look weak and feckless. So they have to do something. And so Trump came out here and he said, well, let's exploit some of this weakness of theirs. Let's exploit their fear of retaliating in too extreme of a fashion. And so now President Trump is threatening to attack a number, 52 to be exact, Iranian targets inside of Iran if Iran strikes any American or American asset, which again pretty much boxes them into a corner to where they can't retaliate at all without risking Trump making good on this promise. Now, the number 52 is supposed to represent the 52 Americans who were held hostage during the Iranian hostage crisis. But it's also noteworthy and probably important to President Trump that it is a bigger number of targets than Iran was discussing. Iran said that they are mulling over 35 potential U.S. targets, of course, none of which are inside the United States. Iran could never do that. They're no threat to us at all. But they are a threat to a lot of the tin pot dictatorships in the Middle East, and, of course, to U.S. troops stationed there to protect those regimes. And so Iran could, strike inside of Iraq or Saudi Arabia or Qatar or, I believe, Jordan. And so obviously what Trump is discussing would be another escalation, because he would respond to their attack on U.S. troops outside of the United States and near their borders by bombing inside their own country, which the U.S. has not done to this point. Israel has done some bombing runs inside of Iran, but Israel's kind of a special case. They seem to bomb everyone without going to war with them. They've been bombing Syria for years, but are not at war with Syria. Now, the U.S., on the other hand, bombing Iran, again, the U.S. has already committed an act of war by assassinating their general. I don't know how the Iranians would be able to avoid a substantial response if they actually were bombed inside of their own country, because that undermines their ability to protect their own citizens. I would think that ordinary Iranian people would then would start to doubt in the power of their own government and the ability of their leaders to actually, do the most basic thing that they're supposed to do, and that's, prevent them from or protect them from outside aggression. That is the most basic function of government. And so, while I still maintain that it is in no way in the interest of the Iranian government to get involved in a war with the U.S., I don't know how they could avoid, having a very, very strong response if the U.S. actually bombed inside their own country. But Trump here clearly is trying to escalate to de-escalate. He's betting that they won't do that. He thinks that he'll just be able to humiliate them and that they'll go crawl back in their hole. Even though, that might be, in some senses, the most logical response by Iran if they were to be bombed by the United States. It still, to me, seems like a very risky bet. I can't fathom the anger that would be felt by the people of that country were they to actually be attacked directly by the great Satan. And it really is rich of, for us Americans to expect the Iranians to not go to war over such a serious act of aggression, considering that the U.S. In so many cases has gone to war with so much less justification. I don't believe that there's ever been a case in which the United States has gone to war because their homeland was actually attacked. Now, something I can't forget to mention is the actual content of what it is Trump is looking to bomb. He said that these are going to be sites important to Iran and Iranian culture, which culture being the key word there. Trump is threatening to commit war crimes in Iran because, of course, it is illegal under international law that pertains to wars, things that most people generally agree on, to bomb cultural heritage sites. Those are typically considered important to human civilization as a whole, not just those individual countries. And while bombing cultural heritage sites, in principle, is not as bad as killing people, it is a very specific kind of evil act, in my opinion. As someone who is such a lover of history, being able to go and visit historical sites and historical monuments is a very special experience, and to think that you have the authority to take that away from future generations, I think, is an absolutely vile attitude. In fact, it's the same attitude that ISIS took when they were going on their rampage across the Middle East. They were destroying all sorts of important cultural monuments. I believe it might not have been ISIS, but I think it was the so-called ISIS affiliates in Afghanistan who blew up those ancient Buddha statues that were absolutely massive and over 3,000 years old or something. Oh, actually, it couldn't have been over 3,000 years old because I don't believe that the Buddha was alive 3,000 years ago. But nonetheless, Persia is a target-rich environment when it comes to destroying cultural landmarks. Persia is an ancient civilization. They have numerous, I'm sure, monuments and historical sites and important, ancient buildings that you could blow up if you wanted to really hurt their pride. But also, this would be a major blow not just to Iran and the Iranian people, but to human civilization. Persia is an important ancient culture, and you shouldn't go and destroy something so important over things that are so petty that are happening in the modern day. I mean, think about the tragedy of how the Parthenon was nearly destroyed in war because the Ottomans used it as an armory to store gunpowder. Our connection to the ancient world is as tenuous as it is, and none of us alive today have the authority to try and sever it completely. And I think it really says a lot about how we Americans are propagandized as we're being brought up about war, that I am more emotionally disturbed by Trump talking about blowing up cultural heritage sites than I am about the constant threats to start wars that will kill hundreds of thousands of people. For some reason, I'm just numb to that at this point, because it's been, I've been hearing about it my entire life. It just seems like a part of reality. And even though I say that I think that, in principle, human life is more important than these inanimate objects, than these old statues and buildings, I don't feel that in my heart. And I think that really is a systemic cultural problem that we have in this country. One that can be blamed both on our government and on our media, but of course on ourselves, because it's always possible to break the conditioning, but it's something that I haven't quite mastered yet. Back to the situation at hand, this escalate to de-escalate strategy reminds me a bit of what Trump was doing with North Korea for a while. Trump was getting very aggressive with North Korea, and he managed to use that tension to try and leverage it into some negotiations. Now, unfortunately, those didn't go anywhere, partially because they were sabotaged by John Bolton. But I think that Trump, in his heart of hearts, might be trying to do something similar with Iran here, because Trump knows that an Iran war is not good for him politically. And so I think that, as reckless as he's being, it's still his intention to try and end this somewhat peacefully. Now, you might be saying, well, then if that was his intention, why did he even go and create the crisis by blowing up Soleimani to begin with? My answer to that would be it's a very dumb idea. I think that Trump is heavily influenced by whoever's around him at the time. I think that if Trump were actually surrounded with good people, he'd probably make good decisions. But since he's surrounded with terrible people, he's liable to make a lot of horrible decisions. And of course, he's wildly inconsistent. So just because Trump decided to escalate the situation a few days ago by blowing up Soleimani doesn't mean that he doesn't intend to de-escalate it now. But of course, his intentions don't really matter in the end. What matters are the results. And the results, as of right now, are not looking good, the prospects for the results. I think that this latest threat, if he actually has to carry it out, will end up being a very horrible and costly mistake. Because striking targets inside Iran, leaving aside whether they're cultural or otherwise, striking inside their country is crossing a major red line. And it might be a point of no return as far as this escalating conflict is concerned. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.